And before we get started, I firstly wanted to go over some general housekeeping tips. The first one is please put all of your questions into the Q&A. And the chat is only for technical difficulties. We are going to present a code word for WSDA pesticide recertification credits. And so that's going to be at some point throughout the webinar, so listen for instructions on that. If you lose connection to the webinar, please just use the exact same link to log back into the webinar. And worst case scenario, there's a telephone number at the bottom of the invitation, and you can always call in and get the audio that way. All right, and with that, I'm thrilled to turn it over to Stephanie Helms, the Executive Coordinator for the Washington Invasive Species Council, to provide a welcome.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Maria. And hello, everybody. My name is Stephanie Helms, and I'm the Executive Coordinator for the Washington Invasive Species Council. And before we dive into Invasive Species Awareness Week, I just wanted to give a brief overview of who we are and what we do. The Washington Invasive Species Council was created by the state legislature in 2006 and is tasked with providing the policy level direction, planning, and coordination to prevent and stop invasive species of all types. We like to compare ourselves a little bit to a compass, providing that direction that all members can use related to their invasive species response and management. Also, all while serving as a central hub for outreach and education statewide. Next slide, please. And to accomplish our mission and goals, the Council brings together all the state agencies that have a role in invasive species, as well as tribal nations, federal and local agencies, universities, industry, and conservation partners. Every organization has a slightly different mission, but the Council unites us all by looking at that big picture and identifying shared resources and responsibilities and filling in the gaps that maybe an individual agency would not be able to fill on their own. The council itself is staffed by 3 people. So that's myself, the executive coordinator, Maria Marlin, our community outreach and education specialist, who's heading this webinar today, and Jessica LaBelle, our invasive species program specialist. And of course, shout out to the Recreation and Conservation Office, which is the administrative host of the council staff. Next slide, please. And with that, I really want to personally thank you all for being here today, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to Invasive Species Awareness Week, a very, very special week which Governor Bob Ferguson proclaimed in solidarity with the National Invasive Species Awareness Week. All around the United States, there are events and webinars happening to raise awareness of invasive species and highlight simple actions that we can all take to stop and prevent invasive species of all types. Invasive species are really impactful and can harm nearly every aspect of our lives, but luckily, many of the invasive species considered the worst of the worst are not yet established here in Washington. So the good news is that we have this unique opportunity to raise awareness and focus on prevention, which is the best tool in our toolbox. Here in Washington, we take really great pride in the work that's being done statewide to address invasive species and steward our natural resources. So this week, we're highlighting one region of the state per day in our webinar series. Next slide. And today's region is the Olympic Peninsula, and we actually get to highlight one of our winners for the Council's annual Invasive Species Recognition Awards program. Jill Silver and the 10,000 Years Institute received the 2024 Outstanding Organization Award for working tirelessly to protect native life in the Olympic Peninsula from invasive knotweeds, reed canary grass, and Scotch broom, to name a few. This hard work is often done while creating job opportunities, and the nominator noted that Jill's work is truly making a difference for both people and the natural world on the peninsula. The improvements continue to protect fish and other wildlife habitat from the damaging effect of noxious weed infestation. So please join me in thanking Jill Silver for all of her contributions and for being here to speak at today's webinar, and I will hand it over to her. Thank you all again. Happy Invasive Species Awareness Week.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. That was amazing. I appreciate being invited, and I appreciate the opportunity to present to everybody and to share what we've been doing. So I'm going to start my screen, which I will bring up in 1 minute. And there we go. And from the beginning. Hopefully you've got it. So everyone, I am here to present from the coast. reporting from a regional invasives prevention program that we've had underway. For me, it's been 30 some years, but for this program itself, it's been over 15 now. And that's a photo I took of the Quinault watershed, the Upper Quinault. And 10,000 Years Institute, a little bit of background. We started in 1992 with a group of graduate students, one of whom is still on the board, from the University of Washington, who all desired to do applied research to answer questions about landscape management and regulatory protections and effectiveness. And so we've been continuing that and focusing on native species, native forests, native early successional species, which are the foundation of climate, economy, industry, culture, recreation, shelter, and sustenance. And to keep them naturally regenerating takes some stewardship in these days of disruptions and disturbance from climate and land use. And so all of these forests that regenerate on their own are incredibly valuable, and they provide critical ecosystem services and myriad functions that we cannot replace on our own. And they should be the end goal of restoration. And restoration often focuses on doing active processes with heavy equipment and wood that's cut from different places and brought in. But we focus on regenerating them naturally. And invasive plants are a big threat to those, as Stephanie mentioned. So we're going to be talking a lot about that today. I'm sure that most of you have heard of ecosystem services, and they do a lot of work without being paid to provide natural functions into services that, as I said before, we don't create ourselves and we can't replace if they go away. And so having adequate vegetation, landform, or large woody material to do all those things is the focus of much watershed restoration that happens, particularly on the Olympic Peninsula, but all over the state and the nation. And we do a lot of activities on the landscape that cause disturbance, including mining for gravel and building roads and harvesting timber. And those activities spread invasives to forests and river floodplains, banks, and bars, from which they continue to move through seed production and flow, water, wind, and other vectors. And so we also have the added impact of glacial retreat and extreme rain events. We're living through an atmospheric river event out on the coast in the last few days. And that causes a lot of sediment movement in river channels and channel migration. And that equals more disturbance, which brings more invasives in from places that they have been introduced and spreads them through the landscape. So it's a continuing cycle where we need large trees to store carbon and to soak up rain and to have roots that stabilize hill slopes and to provide all of the ecosystem services that they do. And yet the migration of rivers and landslides and other parts of wildfires that result from droughts, from climate change, are affecting how those cycles continue. So we work to maintain and support these naturally regenerating forests. This is a photo of the Upper Quinault again, and just thinking about how the richest part of the landscape is in the valley bottoms, where you have the mix of deciduous trees, and on the far left of your screen are the really old conifers that have grown up through the deciduous early successional species into old forests, and those fall in with river migration or age or wind. And they provide all these structures in the river channel itself that stabilize and build habitat. And those processes can be interrupted by non-native species. And most of the folks who focus on doing the heavy restoration, which are building these large wood structures to provide stability in channels, don't really understand that small species like herb robert, which is allelopathic, or Scotch broom, which is allelopathic and competitive, can cause impacts big enough to stop those processes from happening. So these are some engineered log jams that cost millions of dollars to build and have had a lot of invasives brought in and out while they were being built, and that we continue to monitor and help protect as they provide their services to the river in the Upper Quinault. So again, the early successional species are over on the far side. I hope you can see my cursor. The willow and the alder are starting the process to be able to grow the large conifers that are in different age stages behind that. And as they fall in and into a river or are eroded in, or however they get there, they're forming these amazing services in digging down with their roots and their branches down into the hyporheic water, which is subsurface flow, groundwater and surface water combining. Microorganisms clean the water. It's incredibly cold. And they create deep pools of hyporheic and surface water that adult fish can hold in flood stages and hold in droughts, and juveniles can use in drought periods, and the branches provide cover from predation. So for fish, these are super important, and you know that salmon recovery is a big part of what we do in restoration, and salmon are a big part of what we do in our culture and our economies. So for the last over 15 years now, since 2015, in particular, we've been running a program that we got funded through the Washington Coast Restoration and Resiliency Initiative, WCRI, which is being funded through the State Recreation and Conservation Office, which WISC is a part of, the Washington Invasive Species Council is a part of. And we proposed to do a regional invasive plant prevention and control program across 3 counties and 8 watersheds to be able to deal with the plants that are moving via roads and through recreation and through development and through timber harvest, from one watershed to another. We went from doing just the Hoh River and just the Quinault River or just some sites on the Queets River to doing the entire area, and providing up to 25 jobs per year and over biennia. So we've just gotten funded for our 6th biennium, and it's a pilot program that we are intending to build further, but it's provided a lot of insights and methods and rationale for other partners, both north and south, to develop their own programs, and WCRI is also funding those. So we've been expanding the utility and the amount of invasives prevention and control from what it had been in the past and what it is generally around the state, which is site rather than entire region. So in the photos are different trainings and different crews that we've worked with over the years. We've had many, many, many local folks, young and old. And so as there's our website right there that you can go to look up the project, but we focus on sources, vectors, and pathways. So we are focusing to stop species where they start, to follow how they move and the pathways along which they move. And the WCRI funding has provided us a lot of flexibility, which we haven't had under salmon recovery funding or other programs in the past, which don't really recognize invasive plants as being a significant impact. And so we've been able to provide services to landowners and managers across and around the peninsula. We work with every single agency and landowner that will have us. So lots of partnerships, and we've built regional capacity that way. We continually do cross-boundary surveys and rapid response to every plant that we find, new species, species that are already distributed. We work on roads and streams, pastures, and restoration project sites across the landscape. And we're always developing best management practices and checking our control efficacy. And we take a lot of data, so we track and report costs and benefits. And really, one of the most important things that we do is catch new species before they spread, as Stephanie spoke of. while the Olympic Peninsula might look like it's relatively pristine, it's really got an intense seed bank of a lot of invasives already. And the temperate climate here is just perfect for these Eurasian species that spread wildly with floods, especially going out farther and wider down ditches and out floodplains. So then we also are just training lots of local eyes, hands, and spreading the word through communities by working for landowners and property owners and training their kids and their grandkids. Lots of people have a lot more knowledge than they used to. And local jobs really make the difference to local communities. So the investment and the interest in the program has spread. Volunteerism isn't a big thing out on the coast. Rural communities just are busy trying to make a living, so the jobs are important. And so again, we're focusing sources, we're working on interconnected pathways, and we have projects all over the landscape, and the boxes shown in the map on the left there are just various projects that we have going. We're now working as far south below ocean shores. We're working all the way from Westport in Grays Harbor County, all the way around the coast and up and around to Lake Crescent in Clallam County. And every site has to be revisited multiple times per year generally. And so that requires a lot of coordination and a lot of thought. So I mentioned restoration projects a couple of times. Before we started on the Hoh River, which is the second project down in the list in the middle, before we started on the Hoh River in 2001, we just had a very small amount of funding available. It's taken many years to develop the understanding that the investments made in invasive plants on the peninsula really matter to the success of restoration projects. And it still is a process. We're still making the case for new species that show up. And I'll talk about spotted jewelweed in a little bit. But we have built from having just $100,000 a year in the Watershed Resource Inventory Area, WIRA 20, which is the Hoh and Quilly watershed, to now having about $3 million a biennium available for invasives. And we need more. We need 2 to 3 times that much to keep up with what's out there. But the point being, it's building, it's managing. And one of the things that's really expanded is all the way down into the Chehalis Basin. There are groups now, the Chehalis tribe, the conservation districts, the weed board down there that are really working together to copy what we've done up north and to bring it to bear. So that's happening. And restoration really does pay back with a lot of economic and environmental income. And while our watersheds need far more than is or can be funded through existing programs, making the case that keeping Scotch broom out of harvest units like the one that's behind us that did come back in Scotch broom in many places, or in the wind-borne seeds from tansy ragwort or other species, using local crews who can be present and get to know their watersheds and come back and back and back really makes a difference. So we've been talking about how invasive species really cause impacts and cost billions to control. That's Scotch broom in what was a forested site on the Hoh River and isn't allowing red alder to grow. And so we develop all kinds of ways of communicating how invasive species affect things that people care about. And so we just did this Venn diagram for 4 species, reed canary grass, Scotch broom, European green crab, and tansy ragwort, to show the rippling effect out from the types of habitats that they degrade, the ecosystem services that they reduce, and the economies that they damage, so that people can get invested in stopping things early and often. And we have a list of primary and EDRR, or early detection rapid response species, that we focus on. The primary species that we are working on are those that are already here and spreading or have already invaded fully. And then the EDRR species are ones that are just starting to come in. And in the second class B weeds for Jefferson County. By the way, Jefferson County crosses the Olympic Mountains. So East Jefferson County has a lot of plants and ecological climatological regions that we don't have on the west side, completely different climates. And so we just found one spotted knapweed in the middle of a logging road, where it was probably dropped by somebody who had brought in hay from Eastern Washington, or from Montana, or who had horses. And so we found one spotted knapweed plant in the middle of the road that had already gone to seed and had been driven over many times. So we are poised to be expecting a spotted knapweed invasion. And spotted knapweed is the plant that ate Montana. We're not looking forward to this. We didn't need this, but those are the kinds of things that we do. So we find these one species. Wild chervil in the next column over was from East Jefferson County that came on Jefferson County mowing equipment. Wild basil savory was just found in central Clallam County, just east of us right here. So we are looking for these new species all the time, and we are working on the older species continuously. I took a couple of slides from an older presentation, and just to talk more about how we're developing strategies to integrate invasives into not just restoration, but every part of development, and every part of landscape management, and how we're looking to develop funding and what, where, why, and for how long. And the how long is really important. And that's 3 of our staff working through an older forested floodplain that is protected, being in a channel migration zone. And they're working on herb Robert, which seems like it's an innocuous species until it stops all the understory from coming in, including kicking back larger trees. So we get to work in some pretty amazing places, but we are focusing on informing project sponsors and land managers to pay attention to roadside seed sources and to focus on uninvaded sites to protect them. So look at those really carefully. And if you see one plant, don't walk by it. One Scotch broom, don't walk by it. One herb Robert, don't walk by it. Deal with it then. Don't wait for somebody else to come and find it, because by that time it'll be too late. And to know the vectors, ID the sources, recognize and monitor the pathways, and just to always contact us for assistance, for information, and to come out and look at your sites to tell you what's there and to tell you what to do. And we're actually asking, and I'll go after this another time, but we're asking every project that comes through RCO to include 10% for invasive plants for planning, pre-construction, and post-construction and monitoring. And I'll talk more about that. So I mentioned glacial retreat. On the Hoh River, our glaciers have melted back by about 90% now. And once they're gone, cold water is going to be really hard to keep in the river. And Pacific salmon and all the other biota that live in our aquatic ecosystems are cold water species. And we are doing a lot of drone footage. We're looking for species with drone imagery, and also just documenting change over time. And we go out to these bars many times, 5 times per year, to do the Scotch broom on these bars. There's none right here because it was all done. And you see all the wood laying around there? Those are actually pretty big trees that have been washed in by the river. And you see how wide the river is and how there's not many big islands in the middle. You need these large conifers. These are built on old log jams, and that's what keeps them as hard points. So you need this continuous process to maintain. And when Scotch broom comes in from roadside gravel, from culvert replacement gravel, from equipment that's working to riprap riverbanks that are eroding and gets introduced, it then gets introduced with seed, and it stops early succession. You see how there's no alder or willow growing where the Scotch broom scrolls are. And it's not that this isn't older, it's that it has capacity to stop the trees from growing. So riparian succession is super important in these rivers. Anyway, some context and history of us. So we started in 2001. after we found that a river avulsion had captured a knotweed clump at a homestead at River Mile 29.75. I had a Jobs in the Woods ex-logger crew working on stream typing and channel migration zone mapping. And they saw it, they brought a leaf in, they said, Jill, what's this? I said, I don't know. And then I saw it 3 years later dotted down the river, and understood that I had missed an opportunity. So we've been working on knotweed ever since. We're still working on that one clump. We do 4,000 acres of surveys for other species and find knotweed now while we're working on everything else, and map it and flag it and come back in September to treat it. But we're down to about 1/10 of an acre in 4,000 acres, and still every fragment from every plant could start the whole thing over again. So we didn't start getting funding for other species. Tansy ragwort at the top, Scotch broom, reed canary grass, herb robert, Canada thistle, knotweed. Knotweed was the program and didn't get funding until 2010 and then 2016, and we've been building it ever since. And we're still doing all of the Hoh River, from the park boundary at the rainforest all the way down to the coast, but we also do all the other rivers. And these are points of all of the species that we've removed between 2003 and 2024. And for those of you who visit the Hoh River, you probably don't see many of these. And that's because we're out there working on them every single year over and over. The species that's kicking us right now is spotted jewelweed. It's about to start spreading further, and that one's going to be a real problem carried by water. But you can't find most of those species where all those dots are. The red is knotweed, the bright fuchsia is herb robert, the green is reed canary grass, the yellow is Scotch broom. You see how it's on roads. Then there's also spotted jewelweed and Canada thistle in there. So we've learned a lot of lessons on the Upper Hoh Road to focus on roads as sources and pathways with vectors that move down them, and that's informed the entire pulling together and restoration program. And the piece that we also need to do is better ensure weed-free materials and equipment. We need wash stations, which is really hard to do when you have narrow river valley bottoms with lots of water flowing everywhere. So establishing wash station locations is challenging, but we are working on that. And we take a ton of data. So we have Survey 123 forms in XR units, iPhone XR units, also on tablets if we need them, on our phones. And we go out and we take all of the data from every point and polygon, and then we put it into dashboards, and we communicate this data through spreadsheets and maps and photos and presentations and shape files that we share with all of our partners. So this is why the Hoh River actually is relatively invasives free, and we're really proud of that. This is Spruce Canyon. I'm going to go back and just circle, oops, right here. That's right here. That's this farm, this ranch, Homestead Ranch, and this area right there. And you don't see any of those species. I know it's pretty far away, but they're not there. So the other thing that we do is develop all kinds of information that can be helpful to project managers to understand how invasive plants propagate, how many seeds they might have, what the viability might be. And therefore, knowing that when you have one Scotch broom plant reaching over the Hoh River from a roadside, the road managers that go by that plant could be pulling or breaking or cutting that plant to stop 10,000 seeds from getting into the river. We're trying to teach that. We're also talking about allelopathy for revegetation and soil amendments. Need some research on some species, but a lot of these species are allelopathic, which means they put chemicals into soil that stop other plants from growing. It's plant chemical warfare, basically. And then we teach people what the time of year for site access and treatment efficacy is, and we're modeling that. We do a lot of the treatments for everyone, and we bring them along to show them what we're doing. So research is just needed to build understanding of what these plants do and to build workforce to respond. And so we're working with partners like UC California and the Evergreen State College and the DNR and the University of Washington. The OESF T3 is a DNR program, Olympic Experimental State Forest program. And we are working with the forest and the park and DFW and private consultants like Umfficient, with the Washington invasive integrated pest management program. We don't have anybody working on herb Robert allelopathy yet, but we're hoping to find a way to get to that. And we're hoping to start a biogeographic influence of invasive plant project to show how Scotch broom collects fine sediment and fine material and completely changes the shape of gravel bars and sediment movement in migrating rivers. And we are also, oops, didn't mean to go forward. We're also working on glacial retreat studies so that we understand more about how water is going to be moving and how rivers are going to be changing. One of our ways of reaching out to folks is to develop protocols, and we always send folks to the state and county weed boards for fact sheets and the element stewardship abstracts from the Nature Conservancy, and all of the information that's available publicly. But our particular set of practices are designed to address the conditions that we are exposed to. We get 200 inches of rain a year compared to 20 on the opposite side of the Olympic Mountains in Port Townsend. And so we have a lot of beavers and a lot of animal vectors, and we just have a lot of issues that need different protocols and different methods. So we are developing protocols. We finished our reed canary grass protocol back in, actually started in 2013 and finished, keep adapting it for 2021, and we're about to do another adaptation. And we've been training folks how to do that. And what Raina's doing there, she took a seed head off. She's going to put that in a bag, and she's bundling that reed canary grass right there to get it away from all of the other plants that are around it. And she's going to put that branch that's at her right boot there down over the salmonberry that's sitting in there so that it's not going to be sprayed. And she's going to end up spraying that reed canary grass. We've done a small study in Irely Creek in the Upper Quinault and on Wilson Creek in the Bogachiel on reed canary grass that we are now adapting to an integrated program that's going to look at coho rearing habitat and reed canary grass invasions with remote sensing and field studies to publish that information. And you can see this research program up on our website as well. Reed canary grass is filling in cold water habitats and utterly impairing them. Fish can't get through it, amphibians can't rear in it, and water doesn't flow through it. So working on that. And then as Stephanie said, prevention is the most cost and ecologically effective strategy. And that's spotted jewelweed in the bottom here, right above Canyon Creek on the Upper Hill Road, introduced by vehicles from somewhere else. So finding the plants before they spread is the best way of controlling them and avoiding the impacts and the costs, both ecologically and monetarily. And so teaching people to recognize what's in front of them as they're out, because you can pull spotted jewelweed really effectively and get rid of one tiny plant to stop a lot of long-lasting seeds from being produced quickly. We had to do our own flyer for out here. So the one on the left is the flyer that we did once we found it in the hoe. And it has since been introduced in the Dickey watershed. So we used the draft written findings from the state weed board and proposed class C noxious weed listing. So those classes don't necessarily match the place that they cover. And we had to propose it as a Class B in Jefferson County because it is widely distributed in East County, but it hadn't yet been distributed in the West County. And so we're just working at all levels to try to inform and get ahead of what's going on. Anybody, if you see anything that you're wondering about, if you don't have Seek on your phones yet, get Seek or the other apps that are around, but figure out what you're looking at and let somebody know who's going to do something about it quickly. So that was a proposal that we presented to the Salmon Recovery Funding Board, or SURF Board, in 2023 for funding for the Dickey population of spotted jewelweed, which is right here and right here. And they rejected it. The reviewers didn't believe that spotted jewelweed can affect riparian conditions and therefore salmon habitat. And they're wrong. And we're working on educating them. That's spotted jewelweed. You see nothing else is growing in it, and that's in the Dickey. So we are also working on a protocol for jewelweed that will be done hopefully within this month, and we'll be doing trainings for all of our partners out here and landowners and managers so that they recognize it, because we just had a partner go into a site that had a lot of jewelweed that we'd been managing and brought heavy equipment in to replace a culvert without notifying us, and has now spread seeds probably throughout everywhere because of the equipment not being washed. So we're working hard to get ahead, and it's really difficult. That's a map of the Dickey going into the Quileute. This is just above the estuary where the Dickey comes in, just above the ocean. And you can see how it just spreads and creates a monoculture. And we bag it up and have to carry it out, or we spray it. And pulling it means we're bagging it up. It's a lot of weight, a lot of hiking. We have to go in from parking right here by the 7 and then hike down and up. We now have access through this road system, and this is actually where that culvert was replaced. So Scotch broom is one of the species that we work the most on now, and we're working on it from an aspect of climate, wildfire risk reduction, habitat, forest growth, and community safety. And we think fire is probably the thing that's going to bring the most resources forward. But this picture is a drone image that we took of a 70-year-old stand that was harvested and what came back from the seed bank that was underneath all of those trees. And it's kicking those replanted trees back hard. So we need to support investments in workforce development to support all of the other aspects of the landscape that we value, and looking for folks to do research on seed banks and carbon stocks, why red alder won't grow in Scotch broom, what the soil nutrient differences are between Scotch broom invaded places and non-Scotch broom invaded, what the water, soil water is, and mycorrhizal fungi. And we are doing a lot of remote sensing, and I'm going to talk more about that. So that was that spot on the Hoh River that you saw with the Venn diagram earlier. And that's the crew in 2017 after having cleared all of that pile. That pile is now about 1 foot high, and that soil still has not developed into anything that's growing very much. So a long time that it affects things. And we go back in over and over and over again to treat Scotch broom. So our goals and projects that focus on natural climate solutions are broad. We're focusing on young stand and non-merchantable timber thinning to promote resilience and faster growth. We're focused on making biochar out of the thinning biomass, and also biochar out of Scotch broom that we've prevented and controlled through cutting and treating, and then remediate the soil with the biochar. And again, every restoration project and construction project has 10% funding that will go to a conservation corps, plus housing, which we really need out on the coast. And so I'm going to talk about biochar here because it's a really important piece of what we're doing.
10,
But
10 minutes left, Jill.
thank you. Before I get there, Scotch broom's just super, super destructive. And there's our symposium we did in 2020. You can find it on the WISC website. And we're doing biocontrols, lots and lots of biocontrols, and they've started finally exploding, and that's with Washington State University. And the imagery that we're doing with Evergreen State College is using a Planet Labs subscription to apply different sets of images with supervised classification that can make the Scotch broom pop. And from that, we're going to be building further opportunities and solutions for a conservation core and biochar. And so matching skilled, experienced folks with local youth and training to do permanent place-based conservation and make lots of char to reduce wildfire risk and emissions. And using these flame-capped kilns, which we got legalized in the last legislative session under the DNR burn permits, can distribute these through the forest and then burn the biomass that we're pulling out. And lots of folks are doing that. Kelpie Wilson has designed these kilns. And lots of folks are doing that in Oregon and California, but not here yet. So we hope to do that here. And let me see if I can show you folks. The crew is working on a private timber farm, forest farm, and Scotch broom is all around this. This is sweet vernal grass, which is also non-native. And in 6 minutes, they took down 200 square feet of Scotch broom and treated it with aquatic glyphosate and municipal water and blue dye in lab wash bottles. And we've got a protocol that we can send you for that. And then all that Scotch broom is going to end up being able to be made in char. And this gentleman's trees are not growing, so we're going to help him grow his trees better. So the ultimate goal is a regional conservation corps, and they would be working on all kinds of things, including European green crab and invasives in forestry and thinning in forestry, restoration projects and recreation projects. And so jobs for 120 people, $30 million a biennium, with 10 million of that going to housing. And the whole program focus is to grow glaciers back with resilient forests and fish, and keep our climate stable, and keep our region what it has always been. And so we have lots of projects and collaborators and sponsors, and we're grateful to all of them. And thanks to the Invasive Species Council and RCO for inviting me today to share this, and to everyone else that we're working with. And I thank you so much. And do pull that one weed before it goes to seed. And do get in touch with me. Thank you. Happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Jill. That was incredible. Just the sheer amount of work is really impressive. All right. If anyone has questions for Jill, please drop them in the Q&A box that's at the bottom of your screen.
Stunned by too much information too fast.
No questions.
That's how you can get a hold of me. Please do. By the way, the Hoh River really is that color. That's glacial melt.
It's beautiful. Okay, here's a question. Thank you so much for the presentation. I'm interested in the flame cap kilns. Would you still need permits for those?
You do. You need just a DNR burn permit now. And they come in panels. They're flat. You can transport several in the back of an SUV or a pickup truck. You put them into shape on site, just bolting them together. And you need a rake, you need water for quenching, and you need fireproof clothing and gloves. But yes, burn permit is available. Most municipalities don't allow them inside the cities, but you see how that flame is clear and there's hardly any smoke? That's because the heat is going in from the top, from the bottom up the heat screen and down in. So it's heated from above.
Thank Thank you. Any other questions? While you all are thinking, I will go ahead and share the instructions for the pesticide recertification credit.
I'll stop sharing.
All right, I'll take over for a second here. All right, so if you would like one pesticide recertification credit from the Washington State Department of Agriculture, what I need you to do is into the chat, put your full name as it appears on your license, followed by the license number. And then I also need the code word. And the code word for this webinar, or code words, code phrase, is pulling together. So all of that needs to go into the chat. And again, that's one pesticide recertification credit from WSDA.
And Andrew, I'll answer your question. It is a striking statement, and the name 10,000 Years Institute comes from the time since glaciation that all of our ecosystems evolved. And I believe that we can reverse climate change. And I believe trees are the answer. And I see how the landscape has changed. I see how Scotch broom is really affecting forest growth, and harvest has really affected forest growth. And I am interested in solutions like using biochar that increases forest health and forest growth, soil water holding, and nutrients that support plant growth and carbon sequestration all at the same time as one of those climate solutions. So if we all lean in and focus on practices that will do these things, we could do significant amounts of changing climate and potentially growing glaciers back. Maria, you had a question. Will you need the chat for pesticide credits again?
Yeah, so you need your name, pesticide, license number, and the code phrase, which is pulling together. So those three things.
Hi, Angelica. Nice to see you.
All right. No other questions on the Q&A. Oh, Angelica says hi back. All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jill, so much. That was an amazing kickoff to Invasive Species Awareness Week. Great first webinar. Thank you so much for joining us and speaking. And to all the attendees, thank you for spending your morning with us. We hope to see you in future webinars this week. We have one a day and they're all excellent. So hope you have a great, have a great rest of your day.
Have a
Stay
great
safe
week
with the crazy wind, and we'll see you all tomorrow.
All right.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Jill.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye, everyone.